What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here of the Cover 3 podcast, and this is a Bud solo episode. Well, except it's not. Look at that. That's Taylor McHargue. He calls games for us on CBS Sports Network. Taylor, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, bud. How you doing?
Doing well, man. I know we chat a lot, during the season and the off season, and I know you do your homework. So we really try to cover, all of the sport to the extent that we can here on the Cover 3 College Ball Podcast, and that includes a lot of the G5 leagues. So we have the Mountain West rights on CBS Sports Network, which I know you'll be calling quite a few of those games, especially in October and November. You also do some CUSA stuff for us. I just kind of wanted to let's take an hour and run through the Mountain West, man. It's a pretty interesting conference this year. A lot of turnover at the bottom and maybe some real potential at the top. And just figured it'd be a fun hour.
Yeah, no doubt. I think you hit some of it right off the top. But the thing that stood out to me, as I really started to dig into this conference over the summer, was two things. Number one, the turnovers with all the head coaches. Out of the 12 teams, you've got 8 either new head coaches or interim head coaches in a couple situations that I know we'll talk about. And then the other piece is in all this realignment, there's still a lot of continuity with the Mountain West, which fans of the Mountain West, I know they appreciate. You still have the same 12 teams. And then there is real, obviously, with the 12-team expanded playoff now, there is real potential for a couple teams, and one specifically that I know won't be a surprise to anybody. But it's going to be a fun league. I think there's a lot of parity in this league as well, which we'll talk about.
All right, let's jump into it. We'll just start at the not our bottom, but what Vegas thinks as the bottom. And that is New Mexico, a team that has some coaching turnover, and they bring in a pretty familiar face.
Well, I think the hire makes a lot of sense, and I think for Bronco Mendenhall, had a couple years off from his time at Virginia. The hire for New Mexico, I thought this was A++, right? I mean, this was one of the better group of 5 hires this offseason. Now, that's the upside. The downside for New Mexico, we had them late in the year last year. There was already didn't feel like there was a ton of talent that was on that team, and the talent that was there in key pieces, some of them left and hit the portal. Look, the challenge right now for New Mexico is really across the board. They're not favored in a single game this season. If you even look at week 0 coming up, Montana State comes in, and I think it's moved up to an 8.5 line where they're more than a touchdown favorite. And Bud, you may know it may have moved even more since then. All new starting, the entire offensive line is brand new. They do bring back their quarterback in Devin Dampier. He played pretty well at the end of the season, and there were a couple bright spots, especially against Boise State. I thought he showed some flashes. But look, this is for New Mexico fans, this is probably a rebuilding year. If you can, I think Vegas has them at 2.5 on the win total this year. If you get to 3 wins in year 1, I think that's a win. And that it's probably not what New Mexico Lobo fans want to hear. But year 1 with Bronco Mendenhall, again, I really like the hire, but this year is going to be a challenge. This schedule is brutal as well. Again, they're not favored in a single game this season.
I'm kind of hopeful on the quarterback. It's amazing to me, how many linemen off this team went to Power 5 schools through transfer. They kind of missed a window to win a little bigger there, obviously, and just couldn't get things going. Let's switch to Nevada here, to another team that opens in week 0. They're hosting SMU as a 25, 26, 27 point dog. New coach Jeff Choate comes in. What do we need to know about Nevada this year?
Well, Jeff Choate coming in from Texas, a couple pieces that he brought with him, specifically Keaton Crawford, the safety from Texas. I think Nevada fans were excited about that. This was one that I think Nevada fans were a little disappointed at Chuba Purdy transferring in from Nebraska, the quarterback spot. It doesn't sound like he's been healthy since he's been there. Coach Choate talked about in camp, they're having to get another look at his shoulder. He's been pretty limited during camp. And so that allowed Brendan Lewis to win the starting job. That's another team that we had late in the year, Nevada. And Brendan Lewis is an athlete at quarterback that I think does some nice things with his legs. But Nevada's going on back-to-back seasons where they've thrown more interceptions than they have touchdown passes. And last year, I think I have this right, I think there were just 2 touchdown passes thrown for the entire season for the Wolfpack. So this is another one. I lumped them in with New Mexico. I like the hire, but this is a defensive-minded staff. I think you expect Nevada run the football, lean on Brendan Lewis's legs at the quarterback position. But this is another one right next to New Mexico. I think the win total was 2.5. That's probably about right. If they exceed that, that's exceeding expectations in year 1. Like the hire, but this is going to be a challenging season for Nevada.
Yeah, I have them as underdogs of double digits in every game, with the exception of the Eastern Washington game they play. One of the problems is they don't get to play New Mexico. It would be nice if the Mountain West would have pitted New Mexico and Nevada, so at least they'd get one win, and they would be guaranteed a conference win. But they go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's SMU.
They play the top 5 teams in the conference.
Yeah, yeah. That's that, and like their finishing stretch: Colorado State, Boise, Air Force, UNLV. Whew, okay, that's
right.
We'll get there for sure. Let's kind of go up and a little more west. San Jose State brings in new coach Ken Niumatalolo, who was at Navy, and then I think he was doing some like consulting stuff at UCLA, I believe. What do we need to know about San Jose?
Well, the biggest thing for anybody that remembers Ken Niumatalolo's stretch at Navy, do not be worried about, is San Jose State going to come out in the triple option? That's not what they're running. Brought in Craig Stutzman, the offensive coordinator from Texas State. And if you followed what Texas State did last year, burst on the scene with G.J. Kinney. And that staff was all about, they call it the spread and shred, which a lot of it is get to the line quick, a lot of tempo, a lot of screen game, spread you out. They'll use every corner of the field. And I think there's some feast and famine in year one with that type of system, right? Because the downside, as we all know, if your offense isn't clicking, you may go through a 3 and out and be on the field for 45, 60 seconds, and then you're back off and your defense is back on the field. This is another one, though. You just talked about schedule with Nevada. Schedule for San Jose State is tough as well. They've got to get a couple of, on the home games, pick up a couple upsets. They have to go to Air Force, Colorado State, Washington State in this new partnership with the remnants of the Pac-12, and then at Fresno State and at Oregon State. So there are some of the road trips on here. I'm not sure they pick off any one of those. Have to get at least one of these upsets at home. And getting Nick Nash back at wide receiver was huge for them, though. That was one that I think we kind of all expected to hit the portal. He didn't. He came back. And then Soani Toya, second team all-conference at defensive line. That's going to be your anchor in the middle. That's the biggest piece that they have coming back on the defensive side. It's a pretty thin defensive unit. To me, though, there's a clear separation between the bottom of the conference in New Mexico and Nevada, and then San Jose State. Just they have more pieces coming back than those other two. I think there's an outside shot they get to a bowl, but 4.5, 5 wins, I think that's probably about right for them this season.
There's kind of a weird thing with a lot of these guys that were running like the flex bone stuff. Ken, Paul Johnson, a few others. I've watched some Paul Johnson interviews, and this is just really kind of in the weeds, nerdy. But I think if you're watching an hour-long Mountain West preview, you're probably nerdy. Well, welcome to the club. Where they talked about sort of their roots at Hawaii, actually, and how like a lot of that run and shoot stuff is actually exactly the same as the triple option stuff. It's just like you change the formations instead of the pitch. It's the
right.
It's the pass, which is conceptually, I guess, does kind of make sense if you really sit down and think about it, but it's not necessarily intuitive. Just obviously visually intuitive. So I'm curious to see how that will work out. Speaking of a team running the run and shoot, and look at us hitting these transitions on a Thursday morning. Let's go Hawaii. Year 3 under Timmy Chang, I think.
That's right.
Year 3? Yeah.
Yep. Year 3 under Timmy Chang. A couple of key things that are a little bit different for Hawaii this year. Number one, they're not playing a 13-game schedule. They've got a 12-game schedule. They're still doing that sort of standard 1 home game, 1 on the road, and then they've got 3 bye weeks. The biggest thing for Hawaii, though, is they've got 2 FCS schools on the calendar this year. They open with Delaware State, as long as Delaware State can finally make that flight and get there for the game this weekend. And then they've got Northern Iowa as well. But for Hawaii, they've talked about, it's been very clear in the offseason, getting back to a bowl game. That's the key. But they're going to have to win 5 games in their FBS schedule because, again, only one of those FCS teams will transfer in terms of bowl eligibility. I think getting Brendan Schrager back, he hit the portal, and then almost immediately, I believe he took a visit to BYU, came back to Hawaii. I got to see him a little bit at the Manning camp. That's an impressive quarterback in the Mountain West. I think he's one of the, certainly in the top half, maybe the top third of the quarterbacks in this league. And I think you're looking, if you're a Hawaii fan, you're looking to build on the end of the year last year. Won 3 out of the last 4 games, had that incredible walk-off field goal against Colorado State to keep them out of a bowl game. The receiving core, this may be the deepest receiving core in the Mountain West. It's the top 6 pass catchers from 2023 all returned this year. And so, look, there's no secrets about what Hawaii's going to do. They're going to spread it out. They're going to throw the ball deep, try and get back to their roots of those teams that we know in the past. Timmy Chang, obviously, the 2008 Colt Brennan style teams. Try and throw the ball, get on top of people early, build up a big lead, and then go play hide and seek. But again, the biggest thing to me is getting Braden Schrager back, because I really do think he's one of the better quarterbacks in this league.
No doubt. I mean, top 6 pass catchers return. I did see a note that McBride is like working through an eligibility thing. Like he had the suspension, and then I guess he's back practicing. But we'll see if he can go. That big opener post Delaware State. They host UCLA, which is quite a bit of a rebuild themselves. And I guess we'll see if the defense can really do much. But their depth chart is wild. Like they released it, was like, wow, a lot of these guys like change position. They just do a lot of different stuff out there on the island. Keeping with the theme of turnover, Utah State is next on my list to discuss. What should we know about Utah State this year?
Well, the biggest thing that jumped out to me, well, there's 2 things really. The fact that Blake Anderson was dismissed middle of the summer, and I don't know if you saw the statement yesterday, but released on behalf of the attorneys that they're going to go after Utah State for, it looks like, wrongful termination. That's going to be a distraction. And now, how much of a distraction, I'm not sure. But having your head coach fired in the middle of this offseason, Nate Dreiling comes in. He's going to be the interim this season. The other piece that I just forgot about when I was going through prep for this season is Spencer Petras from Iowa. That's now your quarterback at Utah State. And so for me, we're talking about whether or not they could get to bowl eligibility, but for Utah State fans that have hopes of an outside shot at competing for this conference, you've seen in the past where some quarterbacks that are in a system where it just doesn't fit them, which obviously Iowa as a system was not accomplishing much. What can we expect? He's outside of that system now, and I think the reports from spring ball were that he looked pretty good. Looked like this was a different quarterback from what they'd seen at Iowa. Obviously, he has a ton of experience. But for any college football fans that have watched Iowa over the last few years and remember his time there, you go back to that South Dakota State game where I don't think anybody crossed midfield maybe 1 or 2 times in that entire game. Those are the memories that are sort of burned in your mind with Spencer Petras. And look, there's a lot of starters back on this offense, 8 starters, and a lot of production that's around him. So if you could drop in a veteran quarterback and maximize him, I do think this could potentially be a dark horse in this conference to still be playing relevant football in November. The downside, though, is if you don't hit with a Spencer Petras, all of a sudden this turns into, is there these offseason issues that we talked about with Blake Anderson coupled with maybe poor quarterback play? I think that would be the mixture where you look up and it was only a 3 or 4 win season.
To the positive for this team, I was pretty encouraged that they did lose Micah Davis, the receiver, to Ole Miss, but they held on to Jalen Royals, who is one of the better receivers in the conference, and get all 5 offensive linemen back. I thought Dreiling did a really fantastic job at New Mexico State. Like, talk about a team with basically no defensive talent. And for him to just cobble something together, like New Mexico State made the CUSA championship game last year. And then, of course, Liberty dropped like a 50 bomb on him, but like, that's Liberty. That's a pretty sneaky good hire, I think, for them. You could do a lot worse. My thought is there, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Somebody who also has a really, really good track record at winning in difficult spots is now coming to San Diego State. What do we got going on there?
Sean Lewis was my favorite hire, really, of the entire group of 5 this offseason, but especially in the Mountain West. And you hit on it, but I think we may be aligned in this. If you can win at Kent State, you should be able to win anywhere. And this is not a knock on Kent State. Hopefully there's enough self-awareness from that fan base to realize, look, it's a challenging place in the MAC to win. There's not a ton of resources. And in this NIL world, it is really difficult to retain your talent. And he did that. So for Sean Lewis, I think this was a home run hire. I think also for San Diego State fans, just a difference in tempo and what the ethos of this team will be, I think will be huge for that fan base, because we had them last year against Boise State, and they've got Maiden at quarterback, who's really, honest to God, is probably better fit at safety. And he was a safety. He was on special teams before he ended up moving to quarterback. And you could just feel with that fan base that they were so tired of 3 yards in a cloud of dust and having to go for it on 4th and 2 from midfield because they just can't create any chunk plays. Well, this is the exact opposite now. This is going to be up tempo. You're moving quickly. They're getting the ball downfield. Thought it was interesting that Danny O'Neal wins the job as a freshman. That surprised me a little bit that he beat out AJ Duffy. I know with your Florida State ties, I don't know if that was a surprise to you. Marquez Cooper, that was a big to be able to retain him 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons to bring him in, not retain him, but his time at Kent State and then Ball State. Getting him, I think that's some serious production that they'll lean on. The biggest thing in year one, though, is there's only one returning starter on defense. And I do think they will struggle to stop people. Expect a lot of shootouts. I don't think this is a team that's a contender in year one. Is there a chance they get to a bowl in year one? I think that is certainly possible. But long term, I think San Diego State fans, there's a lot to be excited about with this hire in Sean Lewis.
Also, I hate the road trips. I mean,
yeah,
they go at Central Michigan, at Cal, at Wyoming, at Boise, at UNLV, at Utah State. Like those are all, and for different reasons, sort of difficult places to play. But it does feel like they play all of the altitude teams in this league, with the exception of, I guess they get the Air Force in New Mexico, which, granted, if you're in the Mountain West Conference, like there's a good number of altitude teams. There's probably more altitude teams than there are sea level teams. But that is definitely something I monitor when watching San Jose or San Diego State games. But I think, man, like with how hot it is in San Diego, especially in the September months, if you're playing like a noon game at San Diego State, I don't want to watch that 3 hours cloud of dust. I think you nailed it. Like I want something that's exciting. Yeah. I think Sean Lewis has like 4 of the best 6 or 7 Kent State seasons in the last like 125 years of football. It's like
he brought him to 2 bowl games at Kent State, which getting to 1 bowl game during his tenure, I think that was an accomplishment in and of itself. But you're exactly right, Bud, on how the schedule lays out. This has all the makings to me of a team that we sort of forget about in the first half of the year, because so many of these challenges are in the first half of the year. You got Oregon State and Cal weeks 2 and 3. You talked about that road trip to Central Michigan. I think that's a sneaky, difficult game in the MAC. That's probably one of the better teams in the MAC this year. But then the back half of the schedule, I think that's where some of the wins sneak up. You get New Mexico there, you get Utah State. I think that could be a team where you look up at the end of the year and you guys are doing your Cover 3 episode on who's got to win this 6th game to get to bowl eligibility. And I think there's a chance they've got to beat Air Force at home to get to that 6th win.
I agree, and that will not be easy. So a team here in Wyoming that started pretty hot last year, had a little challenges down the stretch at times. They pulled a nice upset over Texas Tech to begin the year. What should we know about the Cowboys?
Jay Sawvell, new head coach. I think if you go back and look at Wyoming a year ago, luck is too strong a word, but there were some favorable breaks in that season that got them to 9 wins. And anytime you get to that number of wins, I don't really care how you got there. But there was, I think quarterback play was a little better than we maybe expected. At special teams, it felt like every time there was a break, whether it was a blocked field goal or punt or kick return, that sort of all went Wyoming's way for the entire season. I think water finds its level a little bit with Wyoming. I still think this is a bowl team this year, but that 6.5, I think 6 is probably about right. You talk about a tough schedule, though. I mean, there are some real challenges on this one as well. I don't love. I mean, certainly Arizona State and BYU and non-conference. BYU may not, bottom of the Big 12. There's still a talented roster there. It's fortunate for Wyoming they get them in Laramie. I don't love their road trip to North Texas. I think that's going to be a challenging road trip. I think North Texas will be better this year, certainly than they were last year. And then down the stretch, it is a really difficult closing stretch. They have to go to Colorado State, host Boise, and then they're at Washington State. And so I think they've got to be able to get some wins in the first half of the year because the closing stretch of 3 games, I think, is going to be really difficult.
I love that snow game they played last year. Like that was pretty awesome. I am curious. They get almost everybody back in the offensive line with the exception of Frank Crum, who was first team all Mountain West. Do we think the new head coach is going to matter here?
I think, is this going to be a difference?
Because it's internal. You know what I'm saying?
Getting them right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I think a lot of this has to do with what do you get out of quarterback play, right? I mean, that's the biggest piece to me. What do you get out of Evan Swoboda, which he's wearing 17, which I thought was interesting. He's like 6'5", 250 pounds. He's got a similar frame to the last guy that or 17 that was about that size. But that's the biggest piece to me. What do you get out of Evan Swoboda? It's a defensive-minded head coach, and I think you'll see Wyoming does not want to play from behind. So this is going to be all the cliches, right? Run the football well, play good defense, protect the football. But the biggest piece to me is, again, all of the breaks that they had last season that especially went their way in special teams. If you don't have that again and you can't create turnover, the difference in turnover margin they had last year as well, I think that's where you get back to, instead of a 9-win team, closer to a 6 and 7-win team.
So the practice reports I've been reading on them out of 720 Sports, which is, by the way, a really badass website name, like, because that's that's their elevation there at Wyoming. The DJ Jones running back, apparently, who was playing some DB, I think, or linebacker for UNC. Apparently, he's looked good. So I'm looking forward to watching him, and maybe he'll have an awesome senior year after being out of P5. Air Force is next on the list. I was talking to my buddy Bill Connolly, and I'm like, what do we do with Air Force from like a projection standpoint? Because normally their returning production doesn't truly matter, because they have unlimited roster size and they just kind of, it's just like stormtroopers almost, like next man up.
Right.
But on the margins, at times, if you have extreme lack of returning production, it can matter. And Air Force is dead last in returning production percentage this year nationally by a mile. So this is like, it's one of the lowest amounts of returning production I can recall for a team that did not change head coaches. They just lost everybody. So I have no idea what to expect about this team.
Bud, you're taking the words right out of my mouth. I have them in week 2 against San Jose State, and I'm so thankful that I have them in week 2 and not in week 1, because I need to watch this Merrimack film, because you just don't know. The 2 returners they have back on offense are both skill positions, both at receiver. There's nobody in the interior. Running backs are gone. All the returning production from a ball carrier standpoint, your quarterback's gone as well. And I agree with you. There's been times in the past where Air Force and Troy Calhoun have reloaded, where they've only had 1 or 2 returning starters on one side of the ball or the other, and you look up at the end of the year and everything was just fine. There's also been some stretches where that didn't happen, where they didn't make a bowl game, they struggled in the Mountain West, and those are the things that, because this isn't, it's always difficult with the academies. You can't. There's no transfer portal coming in. They're not going out and picking up pieces and spending money to go get guys. It just doesn't operate that way. And so a lot of this really is leaning on. There's a couple key pieces coming back. Peyton's adroit, the defensive lineman. I think that's a key piece in the middle for them. The defensive line was solid last year for Air Force. But again, what are the pieces around him? John Bush at quarterback. Likes to throw the ball. I know they think he can throw the ball a little bit better than some of the pieces they've had in the past at the quarterback position. I think you'll see Quentin Hayes as well. But again, this is like the black box for me. There's mystery in this team, and they're going to get obviously a win against Merrimack in week 1. But I've got no idea whether this is are we trying to get to bowl eligibility? Or do they make another run? The other thing I would say on Air Force for last season, and it's similar to what I just said with Wyoming, jumping out to the start that they did, go back and look at some of the teams that they beat up on. It was a very favorable schedule early in the year. They don't have that this year. They've got a trip to Baylor this year. They have to go to Wyoming, and then they get into the meat of the schedule in conference play. They've also got Oregon State on the schedule and Fresno State. So I don't think this is going to be another season where you look up and they're 8-0 or 7-0. I think there's some first half of the year losses. But there's so many question marks on both sides of the ball that we won't know until week 1.
It really is. It really is kind of wild. I'm glad you don't have him week 1, because and it's not like Troy Calhoun would give a whole lot. By the way, typically in interviews, he's not known for his candor, especially about players. So Colorado State is next, and this is kind of the prove it year, I guess, for Jay Norvell.
100%. I mean, this is your highest paid coach in the league. And my favorite offseason headline for the group of 5 was the amount of money apparently getting thrown around to Braden Fowler, Nicolosi, and Torrey Horton, which I think you and I probably have similar feelings on whether, how real $600,000 for each of these guys potentially was. But look, the most important thing here, like you just touched on, is the expectations are not just to get to 6 wins and get to a bowl. There really needs to be, for Colorado State fans, they want to see if this is going to be one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the league, they got to prove it this year. Having Horton back on the outside, I think that may be the best receiver in the group of 5. I mean, he would be a starter on a lot of Power 4 rosters. There are some tough road tests. They got to go to Air Force, Fresno State, but the conference schedule at home is really pretty favorable, assuming they don't trip up like they did a la at Hawaii at the end of the year last year. I think offense wouldn't worry about that side of the ball. Defense is where it's got to be better. They gave up north of 400 yards a game last season, total offense. And that, to me, that unit, if you don't see some significant improvement, especially getting after the quarterback, you're going to look up. And again, this is going to be a team that's hovering around 500. So I think this is a top third of the league type of team. But the biggest thing that's going to determine whether or not they make an outside shot at the conference championship is all on the defensive side of the ball.
My real question here is, so they lose Mo Kamara, who had, 17 tackles for loss. Like he's gone. Grady Kelly's gone to be like the DT4 at FSU, but he's from the Panhandle of Florida, so I get it. The other DN they had very good numbers, and I'm just curious, like, can he do anything close to that if he's the guy? Because now there's no, like, you don't need to double Kamara because Kamara ain't there. So I'll be watching that early and often with this team for sure.
And I think, I think it's totally possible that you look up at the end of September and they're 3-1, because I think they could beat Colorado.
Ooh.
They get them at home. They almost beat them last year. I think that's a rivalry game that they obviously care very much about, that game. And I think the biggest key in that is you have to be able to keep up, and Colorado State can score. They will put points on the board. I think Colorado, if you play it 10 times, they win it more than half. But it's not impossible to me that Colorado State wins that game. I think they're obviously going to lose to Texas week 1, but they'll beat Northern Colorado and they'll beat UTEP. If you look up at the end of September and they're 3-1, that would not surprise me.
I could see that. I also don't think it's totally out of the realm that they could pick off Oregon State. There's a lot of uncertainty in Oregon State. I don't think that they won't be favored, but it's not insane to think that. What if Oregon State is like meaningfully worse than we think they're going to be? That the turnover there is quite substantial as well. In your mind, is Colorado State like a legitimate contender to win the league?
No, I don't think to win the league, and we'll get to some of the reasons on that at the end. I think there is still a talent gap on the defensive side of the ball to being able to stop people at the rate that they need to, especially in a championship game format. When you get off of a home field advantage and you get to a neutral site, being able to get after the quarterback, I don't think they've got the pieces in place right now for to win the conference championship. Could they get there this year? I think that's possible. I think that's certainly possible. Do I think they win the league this year? No, I think they're at least a year away from that.
That makes sense to me. All right, so UNLV, we'll go there next. Very nice year last year. Got a P5 win over Vanderbilt. Some turnover because you lose the quarterback, Jaden Maeva, to USC. He's going to be the backup, but Riley did say it was a close competition. What are you seeing from UNLV this season?
Well, it's another team that, in credit to Barry Odom, it's another team that last year took advantage of a relatively easy first half of the season schedule. Had some struggles down the stretch, but I think the challenge this year is it's a very different schedule. You're going on the road to two Big 12 teams. Houston, I get, is basically a coin flip game. I think it's a 2-point line right now. It may have even moved down. Houston may be the worst team in the Big 12 this year. So UNLV certainly could win that game. But then you're going to Kansas in week 3. And then you've got Fresno State and Syracuse. Those are all in the first half of the schedule. So you're going to find out very quickly, is this a team that just reloaded? The other thing, you've also got trips to Corvallis. They got to go to Oregon State, and they do get Boise State at home. But the schedule in the first half of the year is brutal. It's very different than what they had last year. To me, the quarterback situation is interesting because they bring in 2 guys from the FCS level, Matthew Sluka, I think and Haj Malik Williams. I think that's the piece to me that these are both dual threat guys. And watching some of the FCS playoffs last year, I think watching Matthew Sluka, he's a dynamic talent at quarterback. They only threw for 1,700 yards. Now, Holy Cross wasn't asking them to do a ton throwing the ball down the field. But that's a piece to me that is an unknown, because anytime you bring in, especially from the FCS level, there is a jump there, and we've seen it work out. I mean, obviously the biggest example would be Cam Ward. Neither one of these guys are Cam Ward, but there's a lot of pieces there at the quarterback spot that I'm interested to watch play out. Ricky White at receiver, though, that was a huge retention for them. I thought that would be a guy that maybe test out the portal. Getting him back was big for the offense.
I'm kind of at this place where, like, if you're in the Mountain West, you are almost certainly not going to be able to hold on from an NIL perspective to really high level defenders. So like these guys that can coach defense just kind of cobble it together. And Barry Odom's a really good defensive coach. And I think that he has done a nice job as a defensive coach. And we should probably give credit. Like Arroyo built a lot of this team, by the way. And now he's Dillingham's OC at Arizona State. Like I thought the scouting and like player acquisition stuff they did back when they were really bad was awesome. And like they got a lot of sort of misfit parts. Like, oh, you got a 6-foot tackle, but he's got a 6'8" wing, and they made it work. And in Mountain West, you got to be creative like that. I think UNLV does a nice job of kind of playing on the margins and finding guys who fit for them, which in turn means they're not likely to be plucked away by others. When I say that, knowing that they lost the quarterback, but some of these guys on defense are just like they're smaller, or like maybe they're just a little lighter. It kind of works.
And I think on the defensive side in the secondary, a lot to be seen on whether or not Jalen Catalon and Tony Grimes. Jalen Catalon coming from Texas, Tony Grimes coming from A&M. Those are the two pieces that UNLV, I think there's a lot of hope in both of those players. I know I'm live in Austin. I know there was a lot of hope for Jalen Catalon at Texas, battled some injuries, and they never got the production from him that they thought they would when he left Arkansas. But both of those pieces in the secondary, I think there's a lot of hope riding on those guys for UNLV.
Completely agree. There was one thing I was looking at here is live podcasting. They did make 26 field goals last year, which is I'm pretty sure
a lot.
Yeah, and they like that's tied for fourth in the country. The kicker's gone. Like Odom does manage games at times like a DC. And to me, like that's a bit of a leak, right? From an efficiency standpoint. Like they don't go for it as often as they probably should. 26 field goals is a lot. If they don't have as good of a kicker this year, and he keeps that same approach, that could cost them some games. Because I mean what did they kicked 30, they had 30 attempts. I mean, that's a lot of field goal attempts, personally. So, all right, let's go to Fresno, another team with coaching turnover.
8 in this league total when you count the interim coaches, which Tim Skipper, obviously on the staff already, Jeff Tedford, I think the health concerns and issues, this had gone back and forth a couple times. So obviously wish Coach Tedford the best. But the good news for Fresno State is Coach Skipper is already on the staff. It's not like you had to go out. There wasn't some bring in this extra piece or go somewhere else to find your interim coach. I think this is one, you asked about Wyoming earlier. I think this is one where the coaching change may not matter as much just with the volume of production that's coming back. This is my other representative, and we'll get to the second one in a minute. But I think Fresno State, this is who I would have as your second place team getting into the conference championship this year. A big part of that is they don't have Boise State on the regular season schedule. Now they bookend the season with tough tests at Michigan and UCLA, but in terms of the conference slate, I think it's a pretty manageable conference slate. And they get some of the challenging games in conference they get at home. They get a trip to Reno. The road games I don't think are as challenging. Mikey Keene, I thought was a pleasant surprise last year. There was some streakiness in his play that obviously they're hoping is improved, but I thought he was exceeded expectations in some regards for Fresno State. And the other piece that everybody's been really high on, if you just follow notes coming out of camp, USC transfer, former 5-star rush-in defensive lineman, linebacker, I don't know what you want to call him, but Corey Foreman They talked about this guy. It looks like somebody that you would expect as a 5-star at a USC that you don't always see come through the door to Mountain West program. So this is a team that expectations are high, and as they should be. More production on the defensive side that they've got to replace than on the offensive side. But to me, this is a team that, barring some sort of injury issues, they should be relevant all season and make a real run at the conference championship.
Completely agree. And just for perspective, there are certain guys that really, no matter where they are in their career, and unless they've had some sort of debilitating injury, you should never truly write them off. And Foreman was a top 5 overall player in the country coming out of high school. And like, he doesn't look like anybody else in the Mountain West. Straight up. Now, granted, there's a reason he's there. So we'll have to see if he can play consistently, like what they can get at him. But if he hits his ceiling, there's not a single player in the Mountain West that can try to block him. Like, no. There's not. I mean, like, if you show the ability to play at that level in the Mountain West, you're getting $800K as an off the tackle, and you're getting plucked away. So I love that kind of little dice roll there. It's like, hey, maybe it hits, right? And if it does, good luck everybody else who has to try to block Corey Foreman, which leads us to what I think we would probably agree is the best team in this league, at least preseason. That's Boise State.
The odds, last time I checked, these are the heaviest odds in favor of any team in the country to win their conference. Yeah. And a lot of this just has to do with the volume of returning production. It is on both sides of the ball. They are bringing back almost everybody on the defensive side. I think it actually is everybody on the defensive side, all 11, and the majority of the offense as well. And I think you and I texted some about this. The more I thought about it, the decision to just ride with Maddox Madsen, who is not the more talented quarterback on paper or in reality, he's not more talented than Malachi Nelson. But if you're Boise State this year, you're probably telling yourself, we just need a quarterback that's not getting us beat, and we win this conference. Because the biggest piece that they have coming back, obviously, is Ashton Jeanty, another guy that 2,000 yards of all-purpose production a year ago. We had them, Boise State, at San Diego State. And this was when they were still struggling with some of the quarterback issues. Ashton Jeanty effectively put the team on his back, and they end up winning that game. And they right the ship at the midway part of the season, go on the run that they did last year. And I think when you factor in, again, the Ashton Jeanty coming back, having that workhorse that you know you can get the ball to, and having the entire defense coming back on the other side, there's nothing that says to me that they shouldn't be anything other than not only the favorite, but the heavy favorite to win this conference. And this would be my pick. And I know this isn't groundbreaking. This is on all sorts of projections right now. But I think this is my pick to make it to the college football playoff. The last thing that I'll say on that last piece is how important week 2 is at Oregon. They don't need to win that game, but they cannot get blown out by 4 touchdowns in that game, because it's very similar to what Memphis has going to Florida State. The committee is going to look at, if you think about the odds-on favorites for those 2 conferences, the American and the Mountain West, which I think most people think those are the 2 conferences that one of those representatives is likely going to the 12-team playoff. They will look at their performance against Oregon, and if it's just a 9 or 10-point game, I think that is going to be very favorable in the committee's mind at the end of the season.
I'm curious. First of all, I completely agree with you on they need to have somewhat of a respectable score against Oregon. I think it would also, this conference certainly has opportunities to potentially pull some upsets, right? So like both the Big 12 and or like both Texas State and somebody else from this league plays Arizona State. You know,
Yep.
if the Sun Belt beats Arizona State and the Mountain West does not, then the Sun Belt's going to kind of be like, hey, look at that, right? You know, whether that is in favor of Texas State or, you know, perhaps App. Now, personally, I do think the committee sort of plays favorites and cares about name brand value. And I'm not really sure that most of the members of that committee could even know what city Texas State is in. But they've heard of Boise State. They've heard of App. So that may not matter. But I agree with you. They probably can't get their doors blown off unless they just blow everybody else out. And yet, like, Oregon probably will blow them out. I would think. I don't know
Yeah.
that they really have the people to hang with them. I also Danielson as a promotion for head coach is an interesting choice. I'm not saying it's the wrong choice, but this defense last year was kind of hot trash, man. And like, okay, normally you play pretty good defense at Boise. Last year it wasn't any good. So they return everybody, which is generally good, but it was not good last year. So how much of a leap can they make? I think Madsen's fine. I mean, the numbers were generally pretty okay. To me, not having a 5-star quarterback play like a 5-star quarterback ceiling, the fact that Nelson couldn't win this job probably says a lot about Nelson, but it does talk a little bit to me about the ceiling of this team. Like, if it was Nelson and Nelson was looking like a former 5-star, then I think it's a wrap. Okay, everybody else is playing for second. Madsen, not that he's a bad player, but I do think it leaves the door open. It makes the league more interesting to me, at least.
And I think going back to Oregon, that game lends itself to seeing both of these quarterbacks in that game, right?
Yeah.
If this gets ugly early and the moment looks too big for Maddox Madsen, that's where you say, okay, well, here's our former 5-star on a big stage. Let's maybe there are gamers that does exist. I think that word gets overused, but was there something that we did not see in camp that all of a sudden now, when the lights get bright, Malachi Nelson shines? I wouldn't shock me at all if you see both of them against Oregon. But again, I go back to the Vegas has it 9.5 for their win total for this season. There just aren't very many games on here that I don't think they're favored. A lot of these, I think they're going to be favored by 2 scores or more.
No doubt.
Again, the conference, the way the conference schedule lays out for them, the thing that gets tricky towards the end of the season, you talk about the potential for upsets. They do have road trips to close out the year at San Jose State and at Wyoming. Then they get Oregon State at home. But especially going to Laramie at the end of November, I don't care where you stand in this season. That's a tough road trip. So that one to me, if there's anything on the calendar that I'm circling, if I'm a Boise State fan, it's really that trip to Laramie. But look, I mean, there's a reason, again, with where they're at with their odds going into the season. This is far and away the favorite to win this conference.
I agree. Completely agree. They also, I don't know if they're huge favorites against Washington State. Like, Washington State definitely is worse than they were last year, but Boise will have to play well to win that game. I would think. And to your point about like maybe not picking the right quarterback, dude, Bobby Bowden screwed that up multiple times. Nick Saban screwed that up multiple times. Like with provable results in seasons, like, oh, you picked the wrong quarterback coming out of camp. Kyle Whittingham has done it at least twice that I can recall, like with serious, meaningful losses that hurt Utah. Urban Meyer did it. Bill Belichick, granted, like it's hard to bench Drew Bledsoe, but turns out you had maybe the best quarterback of all time sitting on your bench, and he also, Lloyd Carr did it at Michigan. Like, think about how long it took them to go to Tom Brady. They were screwing around with Brady or Drew Henson. So it's pretty famous examples of maybe like the better player not playing better in camp. It's not always an easy choice.
And I'm sure Boise fans wish they had Portland State at home in week 1 instead of this random trip to Statesboro, Georgia to play Georgia Southern. I think they should win that game. They're favored in that game. But that's a sneaky trip to open the season to play a Sun Belt team that I don't think is going to flinch and be scared of playing Boise State. If you get to the other side of week 1 and there was an upset, it wouldn't completely shock me. And I know Boise State fans have seen some of the chatter are like, why do we have this on the schedule?
Totally. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Mountain West portion of the schedule sets up very favorably. To have that bye right before UNLV is huge. Some of the non-con's a little weird. It really is. But oh no, we're still on. Cool. My screen went black for a second. That's not great. Taylor, you got anything else for that? It's really been enjoyable. Might have to have you back on to do a little CUSA action.
Yeah, let's do it. No, I think like the closing thought for me for the Mountain West, I just go back to there is a lot of parity in the middle of this league. And I think when you get into the month of November, especially, there will be some teams that improve as the season goes along. There's going to be some upsets in this league. I think there's a clear bottom with New Mexico and Nevada, and I think there's a clear number 1 with Boise State. everything in between, all those other 9 teams, anybody can beat anybody really truly on any given Saturday in this conference. And I think that lends itself to this will be a really entertaining conference to watch, and looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun to cover some of these games.
Enjoyed it, buddy. See you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, bud.